I want you to picture something for a second, and I don't mean a daydream. I want you to picture opening your banking app on the first of the month.
Okay.
You haven't been to an office in 4 months, you haven't sold a company, you haven't inherited a dime from a wealthy great aunt,
Right.
but the balance is there. And it's not just keep the lights on money.
Right.
It's book a flight to Tokyo money. It's renovate the kitchen money.
Mhm.
It is a full, robust paycheck deposited simply because you are alive.
It sounds like the opening chapter of a post-scarcity sci-fi novel, like Star Trek without the spaceships.
It does. But the reason we are sitting here today staring at this stack of research is that this concept, a world where work is optional, is rapidly moving from the fiction section of the bookstore to the economics section.
It really is.
We are seeing a collision of factors that is forcing serious people, from Silicon Valley billionaires to government policy wonks, to ask, what happens when the jobs go away but the money doesn't have to?
That is the core question.
Mm.
And frankly, it's a terrifying question for a lot of people because it upends about, 400 years of the social contract?
Exactly.
We are conditioned to believe that value equals labor. If you don't work, you don't eat.
Hmm.
But the sources we've pulled for this deep dive suggest we are heading toward a reality where that equation simply doesn't balance anymore.
We are going to go incredibly deep today. We're talking about the familiar stuff, Universal Basic Income, or UBI, but we're also going to pivot into something that, it blew my mind during the prep for this, which is Universal High Income, or UHI.
And that distinction is vital.
Yeah.
It's so important. UBI is a floor. It's a safety net.
Right.
UHI is a rocket ship. It's the difference between preventing poverty and enabling a life of, absolute leisure.
But I know what the listener is thinking right now because I was thinking it too.
Oh, yeah?
Free money. Nice try. Where does it come from? And won't everyone just sit on the couch eating Cheetos and playing video games until civilization collapses?
The lazy moocher argument. It's always the first objection. But the why now factor is crucial here. If we were having this conversation 10 years ago, I'd say, sure, it's a nice philosophical thought experiment, but 3 big things have changed.
Okay, what are they?
First, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We aren't just building better power drills, we are building minds. The threat of AI displacing cognitive labor lawyers, coders, middle managers is real. It's the Moore's law for everything thesis.
Right, which we will definitely unpack. It's the idea that computers are coming for the white-collar jobs, not just the blue-collar ones.
Exactly. Then you have inequality. The gap between the people who own the stuff, the capital, the algorithms, the land, and the people who sell their time for money is wider than it has been in a century. It's reaching a breaking point.
And the third thing.
And finally, the fragility of our safety nets. COVID-19 was a stress test, and the system failed spectacularly. We saw how quickly stable families could fall off a cliff.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to strip this down to the studs. We're going to look at the history of free money, which features some absolutely wild characters you would never, ever expect. We're going to look at the hard data because there is data on what human beings actually do when you give them cash with no strings attached.
Yeah, that part is fascinating.
And then we're going to look at the future. The robot tax, the AI dividends, and the philosophical crisis of what is a human for.
It is a roadmap that leads to some uncomfortable places, but maybe, just maybe, some hopeful ones too.
Let's start with the basics, because the terminology gets thrown around like confetti. We hear UBI, guaranteed income, negative income tax. Are these just marketing terms for the same thing?
They are definitely related, but the nuances really matter. Let's start with Universal Basic Income, or UBI. The 2 most important words there are universal and unconditional.
Universal, as in for everyone.
Everyone. You, me, the person serving coffee, and Bill Gates. Everyone gets the check.
That's the part that usually trips people up. Why give money to someone who doesn't need it? It seems wasteful.
The argument is twofold. First, administrative simplicity. You don't need a giant bureaucracy to determine who's poor enough. You just send the check.
Okay, that makes sense.
And second, and maybe more importantly, removing stigma. If everyone gets it, it's not welfare. It's a right of citizenship. It's a dividend.
And the other word, unconditional.
No strings attached. No drug tests. No work requirements. No prove you're looking for a job. You get the money, and you decide what to do with it. period.
Okay, so that's UBI. What about guaranteed income? That's what a lot of the pilot programs are called.
Right. Guaranteed income, or GI, is usually what we see in these experiments. It's targeted, it has an income cap, it's designed to lift a specific group, usually those below the poverty line, up to a floor.
So it's not for the wealthy.
Correct. It's
Oh.
more efficient in a targeted sense, but it carries that welfare label that UBI tries to avoid.
And then there's the negative income tax. This is the one that economists seem to love, and frankly, normal people seem to find confusing.
I know, the name is terrible.
Yeah.
But the concept is actually pretty elegant. Think of it as a sliding scale rather than a flat check.
How does that work?
Okay, so the government sets a minimum income level, let's say $20,000 a year for a family. If you earn zero from a job, the government pays you the full $20,000.
Got it.
Now, as you earn more money from a job, the government payment shrinks. But, and this is the key part, it shrinks at a rate, say 50 cents on the dollar, that ensures you are always better off working more.
Oh, I see. So if I earn an extra $1,000, my government check might go down by $500, but I still have $500 more in my pocket.
Precisely. It eliminates the cliff effect, which we'll get into. Once you hit a certain threshold, say you're earning $40,000, you stop getting money and you start paying taxes, like normal.
So it effectively guarantees a floor without sending a check to the millionaire.
Ideally, yes. That's the theory behind it.
Now, when I started reading the source material on the history of this, I was expecting a list of, socialist revolutionaries. I expected Marx. I expected the far left.
Right.
And sure, they are there. But the list of supporters for guaranteed income is bizarre. It's the weirdest dinner party in history.
It really is. I mean, you have to go back to 1797.
1797.
Thomas Paine, one of the American founding fathers, he writes this pamphlet called Agrarian Justice. And his argument wasn't about charity. It was about property rights.
This is the earth is common property argument, right? I read about that.
Exactly. Paine looked around and said, wait a minute. Before civilization, the earth belonged to everyone. You could hunt, forage, walk anywhere.
Oh.
It was a common inheritance.
Okay.
He argued that by creating private property, by fencing off the land, we took away that natural inheritance from every human being. We dispossessed them.
So the payment is essentially rent? Is that the idea?
He called it a ground rent. He proposed that landowners should pay a tax into a national fund, and every citizen, upon turning 21, should get a lump sum of 15 pounds.
15 pounds.
And then another 10 pounds a year after age 50. It was compensation, it was justice, it was paying a debt for taking away their access to the commons.
Which is such a fascinating way to frame it. It's not help the poor, it's pay what you owe.
It reframes the moral argument entirely, and then you jump forward and you see Napoleon Bonaparte apparently nodding along to this idea, though he was, a bit busy conquering Europe.
Right, a little preoccupied.
And then you see Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. advocating for it. In his final book, Where Do We Go From Here?, King argued that we should just abolish poverty directly through a guaranteed income.
And for him, it was tied to racial justice.
Absolutely. He realized that racial equity was impossible without economic equity. He saw it as the most direct and effective solution to the poverty that traps so many black communities. The Black Panthers were also huge advocates for it.
That tracks. But then we take a hard right turn. Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon.
The guy who created the EPA, sure, but not exactly a hippie. In 1969, he tries to pass the Family Assistance Plan. This blew my mind. We almost had a basic income in the United States 50 years ago.
We were incredibly close. I mean, nail-bitingly close. The Family Assistance Plan, or FAP, was essentially a negative income tax for families with children.
Yeah.
Nixon went on national television and presented it to the nation.
And it passed the House?
Yes, House of Representatives by a huge margin. It was happening. It looked like a done deal.
So why aren't we cashing those checks today? Who killed it? What happened?
It died in the Senate, and it was a death by strange bedfellows in reverse. You had a pincer movement.
Okay.
On one side, you had conservative senators who just hated the idea of something for nothing. They wanted strict work requirements. They worried it would destroy the Protestant work ethic, the usual arguments.
And the other side? Who was on the other side of the pincer?
This is the tragic part. The Democrats and the welfare advocates.
Oh.
They thought the payment Nixon proposed, it was about $1,600 a year for a family of four, was just too low.
Not enough.
Not enough to live on. So they voted against it because they wanted more. They wanted something better.
Talk about letting the perfect be the enemy of the good.
It's a classic tragedy of political compromise. The left killed it for being too stingy. The right killed it for being too generous. And the whole idea went into a coma for 50 years.
But even the hardcore free market guys liked it. Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek. I mean, these are the guys whose posters are on the walls of libertarian think tanks. Why on earth would they support giving people free money?
2 words: efficiency and liberty. That's their gospel.
Okay, explain that.
Friedman looked at the welfare state of the 1960s and saw an absolute mess. He saw thousands of bureaucrats. He saw government workers deciding what poor people could eat, where they could live, how they should spend their money.
He saw it as government intrusion.
He saw it as paternalistic and incredibly wasteful. He thought, look, if we want to help poor people, just give them the cash.
Simple as that.
Cash is efficient. The recipient knows what they need. Maybe it's food, maybe it's a car repair, maybe it's tuition for a night class. A bureaucrat in an office 1,000 miles away doesn't know that.
So for Friedman, a negative income tax was a way to shrink the government.
Shrink the government, fire the bureaucrats, and empower the individual. That was the whole idea.
It's the income security as liberty argument. You aren't truly free if you're starving.
Exactly. And you aren't free if a government caseworker is auditing your grocery list. The core philosophy that unites all these strange bedfellows is this idea of a floor, a foundation for liberty.
Which brings us neatly to the mess we have today. Because we don't have UBI, we have this patchwork of means-tested welfare programs, and according to the Center for Hunger-Free Community source, this system is actually, in many ways, designing poverty, not solving it.
It is designed with good intentions and absolutely terrible mechanics. The biggest villain here is something called the cliff effect.
I see this term a lot. Walk us through the math of a cliff. How does it actually play out for a real person?
Okay, let's take a hypothetical single mother. Let's call her Sarah. She has 2 kids. She's working a part-time job earning minimum wage.
Okay.
Because her income is low, she qualifies for SNAPIC, which is food stamps, maybe a child care subsidy, and Medicaid for health care. She's scraping by, but those benefits keep her afloat.
So Sarah is surviving.
She's surviving. Now, Sarah's a good worker. Her boss offers her a promotion, or maybe just more hours. It comes with a raise. Let's say that raise amounts to an extra $2,000 a year.
Which should be great news.
It should be life-changing.
Yeah.
She's excited. That's progress.
Yeah.
But that extra $2,000 pushes her total income, just say $50, over the eligibility limit for her child care subsidy.
Oh no, I think I see where this is going.
And it's not a gradual reduction. It's a cliff. One day she's eligible, the next day she's not. Suddenly she loses the child care subsidy completely.
And how much was that subsidy worth?
That subsidy might have been worth $8,000 a year. So she earned an extra $2,000 from her hard work, but she lost $8,000 in benefits. Her net income has dropped by $6,000 because she took a promotion.
That is absolutely devastating math. It's a 300% tax on getting a raise. It's insane.
It effectively punishes ambition. It traps people. Sarah does the math, or she experiences the crash once, and she learns a very hard lesson. I cannot afford to take that promotion.
It forces people to stay poor to survive.
We call it the employment trap. It subsidizes low wages and bad employers because workers are terrified to leave the safe zone of poverty where their benefits are secure.
And on top of that, there's the indignity of it all, the paternalism you mentioned.
The surveillance, the constant paperwork, the drug tests, the restrictions on what you can buy.
Right.
SNAP benefits can buy carrots, but they can't buy toothpaste. They can't buy diapers. They can't buy tampons. They can't buy cleaning supplies.
Because apparently poor people don't need hygiene or to clean their houses.
It's based on this deep assumption that the government knows better.
Yeah.
It assumes that if you give a poor person cash, they'll waste it. But if you give them a voucher for corn, they'll eat the corn.
A deep lack of trust.
A profound lack of trust in the poor. And it ignores the reality of life. Maybe Sarah's pantry is full, but her car has a flat tire. If she can't fix that tire, she loses her job, and then the pantry will be empty soon enough.
Food stamps don't fix tires.
Cash fixes tires.
And this is all compounded by the fact that wages have stagnated. The source mentioned the federal minimum wage hasn't moved since 2009.
Not a penny. It's stuck at $7.25.
Which is, I mean, you can't live on that anywhere in America.
Not anywhere. And adjusted for inflation, the minimum wage has lost about 30% of its purchasing power since 1968.
30%.
So we have a labor market that doesn't pay enough to live, and a safety net that actively punishes you for trying to earn more. That is the structural failure that is driving this renewed interest in UBI.
So let's test that trust theory. The critics, and there are many, say that if you just hand people cash, the economy will grind to a halt because everyone will quit their jobs. They say the dignity of work will vanish.
The couch potato apocalypse.
Right. But we don't have to guess, do we? We have data. A lot of it.
We have quite a lot of data now from all over the world, and the lazy moocher theory really takes a beating when you look at the actual numbers.
Let's start with the big daddy of them all, the one that's been running the longest. Alaska.
The Alaska Permanent Fund. Since 1982, every single resident of Alaska, man, woman, and child, has received an annual dividend paid out from the state's oil royalties.
How much are we talking about?
It varies year to year with the price of oil, but it's usually between $1,000 and $2,000.
Which isn't enough to live on, obviously. You can't retire on $2,000 a year.
No, but for a family of four, that's $8,000. That's a used car. That's a heating bill for the winter. That's significant.
It's a real cushion.
A real cushion. And a comprehensive study by the economists Jones and Marescu looked at decades of this program. And here is the headline. It had no effect on aggregate employment.
Meaning people didn't quit their jobs.
On the whole, no. The employment rate stayed flat compared to similar states without a dividend. But here's the nuance that I love, the part that's really interesting.
What's that?
Part-time work increased by 17%.
It went up. Why?
Because the cash smoothed out the volatility of life. In a seasonal economy like Alaska, or just in the modern gig economy, your income is spiky. You might make $0 in November and $5,000 in December.
Right.
That fear, that volatility, it keeps people from taking risks. The dividend provided a predictable cushion. It allowed people to take a breath. It didn't make them lazy. It made them flexible. Maybe they could afford to stay home with a sick kid or take a month to train for a better job.
That concept of taking a breath leads us to Stockton, California. This was a much more recent experiment, the SEED pilot.
Yes, launched by the mayor at the time, Michael Tubbs, is one of the first big modern American experiments. They gave $500 a month to 125 randomly selected residents for 24 months.
And these were people living in neighborhoods with a median income below the city average.
Yes, this was a targeted, guaranteed income program.
And what happened to the employment rate there? Because this is a group that critics would say is at risk of dropping out of the workforce.
The exact opposite happened. Employment increased.
It went up.
It went up significantly.
Yeah.
At the start of the program, 28% of the recipients had full-time employment. A year later, that number was 40%.
I want to hammer this home. You give people free money, and they work more. That defies Economics 101.
It defies the simplistic version of economics they teach you on the first day. But it makes perfect intuitive sense if you understand what poverty actually is.
Explain that.
Poverty is expensive. Poverty is time-consuming. If you are working 3-gig jobs, driving for Uber, delivering for DoorDash, walking dogs, you are exhausted. You are just trying to keep your head above water.
You're on a treadmill that's moving too fast.
It's moving way too fast. You cannot take a Tuesday off to go interview for a manager position at a warehouse because you will miss the rent payment. You're trapped in the short term.
So the $500 slowed the treadmill down.
Exactly. It gave them agency. That's the word that keeps coming up in the qualitative interviews with the recipients. One recipient said it allowed him to stop doing odd jobs and actually focus on getting a certification. It bought him the time to upgrade his life.
So it's an investment, not a handout.
It's an investment in human potential. And the health impacts were huge too, right?
The source material on this was incredible.
Massive reductions in clinically measured depression and anxiety. They were sleeping better. They were physically healthier. They were better able to pay for unexpected emergencies, which is a huge source of stress.
And that saves society money in the long run.
Of course. If you aren't having a panic attack, you aren't going to the ER with chest pains. It's a virtuous cycle.
There's another case study that I found really moving, the Mingcome experiment in Manitoba, Canada. This was back in the 70s.
I was.
And the story of the data itself is wild. It was basically lost in a warehouse for decades.
It was. It's an amazing story. The government changed, the funding for the analysis was cut, and the boxes of data were literally gathering dust in a garage until a researcher named Evelyn Farrakle, dug them up decades later. She painstakingly matched the old records to modern health outcomes.
And what did the ghosts of the 70s tell us?
They told us pretty much the same story. Primary earners, adult men mostly, did not quit their jobs. The labor reduction was negligible, about 1%.
But there were two specific groups who did work less.
Yes, new mothers and teenage boys.
Which sounds bad on the surface until you ask why.
Exactly. New mothers used the money to extend their maternity leave. They stayed home with their infants longer. I think most of us, regardless of politics, would agree that is a net positive for society.
And the teenage boys.
They stopped dropping out of high school.
Yeah.
In that community, Dauphin, Manitoba, before the experiment, There was huge pressure on 16-year-old boys to get a job at the farm or the factory to help support the family. With the income checks, the families could survive without that child labor. So the boys stayed in school. Graduation rates went up.
So we traded a few hours of factory work for high school diplomas. That seems like a pretty good trade.
A fantastic trade. And again, the health outcomes were stunning. Hospitalization rates in that town fell by 8.5%, specifically for things like accidents and mental health issues.
When you remove the existential dread of will we eat tomorrow, people stop getting hurt as much.
It seems so. It reduces the cognitive load of poverty.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here because we promised a balanced view. There was a very recent study, the OR Youth study, backed by Sam Altman's group Open Research, and the headlines on this one were a bit different. They were a little more skeptical.
Yes, and we need to face this data honestly.
Yeah.
This was a massive, rigorous RCT randomized control trial. They gave $1,000 a month to low-income Americans, and they did find a reduction in labor supply.
How much of a reduction?
The recipients worked about 1.3 hours less per week on average. Labor market participation dropped by about 2 percentage points, and earned income, so money from jobs, dropped by about 5% if you exclude the transfer payment itself.
So the critics aren't entirely wrong. Some people did work less when they got the money.
They aren't entirely wrong, but we have to look at the magnitude. 1.3 hours a week, that's leaving work an hour early on a Friday. It's not quitting the workforce to become a hermit.
That's a good point. Context matters. And what were they doing with that extra time?
Well, some of it was leisure, yes, but a lot of it was caregiving for family. And some of it was being more selective about job offers, holding out for a better opportunity.
And what about the health effects in that study?
Interestingly, this study didn't find the same immediate physical health bumps that the others did. It suggests that cash isn't a magic wand that cures everything instantly.
$1,000 a month doesn't fix that.
If you have chronic health issues caused by decades of poverty and stress, $1,000 a month for 2 years doesn't fix that overnight. It challenges the silver bullet narrative.
It's a tool, not a miracle cure.
Correct. But the finding that people work slightly less shouldn't necessarily be viewed as a failure of the program.
How so?
If that work was a low-value, soul-crushing, minimum wage job, and they replaced that hour of work with an hour of time with their kids or an hour spent learning a new skill, is that an economic loss or a social gain?
That is the philosophical pivot point. Because up until now, we've been talking about UBI as a poverty fix. How do we stop people from starving? How do we fix the welfare cliff?
Right, we've been talking about the present.
But now I want to shift gears completely. I want to talk about the future. I want to talk about universal high income.
This is where we leave the 20th century behind. UBI is about survival. UHI is about abundance.
The source from the Tax Project Institute describes UHI as a middle class or luxury income. We are not talking about $1,000 a month to get by. We're talking the equivalent of $100,000, maybe $175,000 a year per person.
The premise here is entirely technological. It rests on Sam Altman's thesis, which he calls Moore's Law for everything.
Okay, we all know Moore's Law computers get twice as fast and half as cheap every 2 years or so.
Right. Altman argues that AI is going to apply that same exponential curve to everything. The cost of intelligence is collapsing.
I struggle with this. I understand how a computer chip gets cheaper, but how does a house get cheaper? How does a heart surgery get cheaper? Those are physical things.
Think about the inputs. What is a house? It's materials and labor. If AI-driven robots can mine the materials, transport them, and 3D print the house 247 with 0 wages, the cost of the house collapses to the cost of the raw atoms and the energy. What is surgery? It's a very, very expensive human expert, plus some equipment. If an AI robot can perform that surgery better, faster, and for the cost of electricity, the price of healthcare collapses. Legal advice, education, transportation. The theory is that AI will demonetize almost everything by taking labor out of the equation.
So Elon Musk's positive AI future is basically a world where the cost of living drops to near zero.
That's the theory. If robots do all the work, goods and services become hyperabundant, scarcity is largely solved. In that world, money itself changes meaning.
How so?
A high income might not mean you have $1 billion in the bank. It means you have the purchasing power to live like a king because everything is dirt cheap. Your UHI check has immense power.
But, and this is it, but the size of the Death Star, who owns the robots?
And that is the multi-trillion-dollar question. Welcome to the Broligarchy problem.
The Broligarchy, I like that.
The sources discuss this concept of the fifth great transformation. If labor is no longer the way we distribute wealth, because nobody has a wage, then the only people with wealth are the people who own the AI, the people who own the robots.
It sounds like a new kind of feudalism. You have the tech lords in their castles, and the rest of us are just waiting for our digital crumbs.
There is a concept from sociology called symbolic violence that is really relevant here. It's the idea that by accepting this allowance from the AI owners, we are accepting a subordinate status.
We become dependent.
We become passive recipients. We are pets, well-fed pets, maybe living in nice houses, but pets nonetheless. We lose our agency to shape the world because we don't produce anything the world needs anymore.
That is deeply unsettling, and it leads directly to the meaning crisis. If I don't need to work to survive, and I can't even work to get ahead because a robot does it better, what am I for? What's the point?
John Maynard Keynes saw this coming back in the 1930s. He predicted the 15-hour work week. He worried about a kind of nervous breakdown for humanity.
A nervous breakdown.
He said we spent all of human history solving the economic problem, the struggle for subsistence. When that's gone, what do? We have spent 100,000 years evolving to struggle. Our brains are wired to solve problems, to hunt, to build. If you remove the struggle, you risk removing the purpose.
Musk said it himself in an interview. It is less clear how we will find meaning. It's the Wall-E scenario. We just float around in chairs drinking shakes until we die.
It's the difference between freedom from and freedom to. UHI gives us freedom from hunger, freedom from toil, freedom from want.
But do we have the cultural maturity to use the freedom to?
Free to create art, to explore philosophy, to build communities, or do we just doom scroll until our civilization atrophies?
Okay, before we get too existential, we have to talk about the price tag. Because I did some back-of-the-napkin math on UHI, and my calculator started smoking.
The math is terrifying. A basic UBI, just the poverty line stuff we were talking about earlier, would cost the U.S. about 12 to 15% of GDP.
Which is a massive lift, but it's in the realm of possibility.
It's a huge lift, but you could theoretically do it by cutting other programs, raising taxes. It's a political challenge. But UHI, the Tax Project Institute, estimates a cost of over $7 trillion a year.
7 trillion.
That is 143% of current federal revenue.
You can't tax your way to that. If you taxed every single billionaire at 100%, you wouldn't get there for more than a year or two.
And you can't fund it with income tax because remember, in this future, there is no income. Nobody has a job.
Right, so where on earth does the money come from?
You have to tax the source of the new wealth, the machines and the companies that own them. Sam Altman proposed an idea he calls the American Equity Fund.
Okay, how does that work? It sounds complicated.
The basic idea is instead of taxing cash profit, which companies are very good at hiding, you tax equity. You require every major company, say over $1 billion valuation, to transfer, say, 2.5% of their shares into a national fund every year.
So the government or the people would own a piece of every big company.
Exactly. So if OpenAI, Tesla, Google Core becomes a quadrillion-dollar company, the American people collectively own a huge chunk of it. The dividends from those shares are what pay for the universal high income.
So we socialize the ownership of the AI stack. We all become shareholders in Earth, Inc.
That's the idea. It's a way of distributing the gains from automation to everyone, not just the founders and venture capitalists.
There's also the land value tax idea, which loops us back to Thomas Paine in a really elegant way.
Right, because robots can make cheap iPhones, but they can't make more land in Manhattan. Land will always be scarce.
So you tax the land itself.
You tax the unimproved value of the land. If you own a plot of land that becomes valuable because society built a city and a subway stop around it, you owe a rent back to society for that unearned wealth. It's also seen as the most efficient tax because you can't hide land in an offshore bank account.
What about the inflation trap? This is another huge objection. If everyone has $100,000, doesn't a loaf of bread just start to cost $500?
That is the supply constraint, and it is the single biggest risk. Money is just a claim on resources. If you print a ton of money but you don't produce more bread, you just get hyperinflation.
So UHI only works if the AI actually delivers the promised abundance.
Precisely. If the robots fail to build the cheap houses and grow the cheap food, and you just give everyone money, the whole system collapses. The technological abundance has to come first, or at least in tandem.
Which is why some people argue for universal basic services instead of cash.
Yes. The UBS argument is, don't give me $10,000 to pay my rent. Just make the housing public and free. Don't give me money for a bus pass, just make the bus free.
Decommoditize the basic.
Decommoditize housing, transport, food, healthcare, and education so that inflation can't touch them. Your UHI check is then for everything else, the travel, the hobbies, the luxuries.
That feels like a safer path in some ways, but a much more bureaucratic sort of Soviet-style one in others.
It's a huge debate. It's the cash versus in-kind benefit argument all over again. It's the Star Trek model. No money, just replicators providing everything you need.
So let's look at the timeline, because this feels really far away, but the people proposing it act like it's right around the corner.
The sources outline a kind of three-phase transition. Phase 1 is right now, 2025 to 2030.
What happens in phase 1?
We are seeing the rise of AI agents. They're taking over call centers, basic coding, copywriting, paralegal work. This is where we will start seeing the welfare cliffs we talked about really start to break. We will likely see things like an expanded child tax credit or mini UBIs to patch the holes in the safety net.
Okay, so patching the current system. What's phase 2?
2030 to 2040. This is the integration of AGI, artificial general intelligence, machines that can genuinely think and reason like us,
The science fiction stuff.
combined with humanoid robotics. This is where the truck drivers, the warehouse workers, the construction workers, and even the surgeons start to face mass displacement.
This is the danger zone.
This is the maximum danger zone. If we don't have the American Equity Fund or a robust UBI in place by then, we are looking at massive social unrest.
Riots, essentially. People aren't going to starve quietly while robots drive their trucks and perform their surgeries.
Exactly. And then you get to phase 3, 2050 and beyond. This is the post-money civilization. If we survive the transition, we enter the age of abundance. The cost of living is negligible. Work is a hobby, not a necessity.
It sounds like we need a new social contract, a fundamental rewrite of our relationship with work and society.
We absolutely do. For all of human history, the contract was labor for survival. You work, you get paid, you eat. The new contract has to be something like existence entitles you to a dividend.
A dividend from what?
A dividend from our collective technological progress. We have to view technology not as the private property of a few genius inventors, but as the cumulative heritage of all of humanity. We all stood on the shoulders of giants to get here. We all deserve a view from the top.
But the politics of that, I mean, how do you convince the billionaires to give up their equity? How do you convince the government to manage a fund that size without corruption?
That is the final hurdle. It's the broligarchy problem again.
Yeah.
If the governance of this powerful AI is centralized in the hands of 3 guys in a bunker in New Zealand, we are in deep, deep trouble.
It becomes a tool of control.
An incredible tool of control. For UHI to be a tool of freedom, the governance of the AI itself has to be democratic. We need to democratize the production, not just the consumption.
That is the thought that keeps me up at night. We have the technology to build heaven, but we have the political and social structures that might just build a very comfortable hell instead.
It is the ultimate test of our species. Can we learn to share the abundance we create?
We've covered so much ground today. From Thomas Paine's land tax to Richard Nixon's failed bill, from the frozen plains of Alaska to the future of robot-built cities.
It's a huge topic.
And it's clear that UBI isn't just about welfare. It's about architecture. It's about how we design the entire economic system.
That's a great way to put it. UBI is the patch for the bugs in our current version of capitalism. UHI is the proposed operating system for the next version.
I want to leave the listener with that question we touched on earlier, the one about meaning. I was reading a quote from the source material, and it asked if humans would suffer from cognitive atrophy.
It's a real risk. The old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. If we don't need to think to survive, if we don't need to struggle or solve problems, will we just stop thinking?
Or, and this is the hopeful version, will we finally start thinking about the things that actually matter?
Right.
When you aren't worried about rent, maybe you finally write that novel. Maybe you finally volunteer to coach that Little League team. Maybe you just spend 3 hours watching a bug crawl across a leaf with your kid, and for the first time, that feels like enough.
The robots can build a house, they can grow the corn, they can probably write a decent pop song, but they cannot generate purpose. That is the one job that will never be automated.
That's entirely up to us.
And honestly, that might be the hardest job of all.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. It's a lot to process, but hey, maybe one day you'll have all the time in the world to think about it.
Let's hope so. And let's hope we use it well.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the future.